Okay, so get this. Today we're diving into something pretty amazing in the world of stroke recovery. I mean, we're talking about potentially rewiring the nervous system here, folks. It's called contralateral C7 nerve transfer. You ever heard of that?
It's a mouthful, right?
It's actually a technique borrowed from, get this, brachial plexus injury treatment. So we're talking about taking a working part from one arm to help the other after a stroke. Wild, eh?
It really highlights how incredible the nervous system is, how adaptable it can be. We used to think of stroke recovery as this limited window, but the C7 nerve transfer, that's really challenging that assumption.
So instead of just managing symptoms, it's almost like hitting a reset button years later.
That's a great way to put it. It's like offering the nervous system a new route for those signals to travel.
Okay, hold on. Let me grab my notes. This is where it gets really interesting. The C7 nerve. What makes it so special?
Yeah.
It can't just be any random nerve, right?
You're right. It's definitely not random. The C7 nerve is a workhorse, essentially. It's responsible for about 20% of the nerve fibers controlling your arm. But here's the really interesting part. Its functions actually overlap with other nerves.
Okay.
So we can actually borrow some of its fibers without, significantly impacting the donor arm.
So it's like borrowing a cup of sugar from a neighbor who has a pantry full. They won't even miss it.
Yeah.
But in this case, that cup of sugar could mean the difference between someone being able to button a shirt or, struggling with it for years.
Exactly. And that brings us to this groundbreaking study by Zhang and his team. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine back in 2018. Really put C7 nerve transfer on the map for stroke recovery.
Oh, yeah, this is a randomized controlled trial, right?
Oh, yeah.
I remember hearing about this a while back.
Yeah, so they looked at patients who had this procedure along with intensive rehab, and they found significant improvement in both spasticity and motor function. And here's the key. Even years after their stroke.
See, even before we get into the details, that's huge. Years after, most therapies, you're racing against the clock, but this, it's like you said, a reset button years later.
It's really quite remarkable, yeah. And what's even more interesting, the spasticity reduction. They found that it happened incredibly quickly.
Like how quickly?
Even before the nerve was fully reconnected.
Wow, really?
It seems that just by interrupting the faulty signaling on the affected side, you're essentially giving the system a chance to kind of recalibrate.
So it's like turning off a glitching computer and turning it back on again. And suddenly, things are working smoother. I like that analogy. So walk me through what happens as that new connection forms.
Well, as those transferred nerve fibers start to connect with their new targets, new pathways are essentially built. And with intensive rehabilitation, those pathways become stronger and stronger. And that leads to those aha moments for patients, like suddenly being able to grasp a cup or button a shirt after years of struggling.
Okay, now we're cooking. This is what I'm talking about, real tangible improvements, not just managing the decline. But I'm guessing it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, right? This Zhang study, though, it feels like we're just scratching the surface here, right?
You're absolutely right. As groundbreaking as it was a relatively small group of patients.
Yeah.
So to really understand who benefits the most and what the long-term effects are, we really need those larger multi-center trials.
It's always those clinical trials, isn't it?
It's the long game, but it's how we get answers.
Right, exactly. We want to make sure this actually helps people in the real world, not just, looks promising in a lab setting.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
And there are so many questions still to be answered, like, what about older stroke patients?
Oh, right.
The brain's plasticity changes as we age, so we can't just assume the same results will hold true for everyone.
Makes sense.
And then there's the question of rehab.
Yeah, how does that all fit in?
Exactly. How does C7 nerve transfer work with different rehabilitation approaches?
Is there a perfect combo?
That's what we need to figure out.
It's like we can rewire the hardware, but what's the best software to run on it, right?
Perfect analogy.
So many factors.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's zoom out for a second. Let's say this pans out. C7 nerve transfer, it works. Could this change how we think about treating other conditions too?
Now, that is a really interesting question because this whole idea, right, borrowing a technique from one area of medicine and applying it to another.
Yeah.
It's like we've opened up this whole new toolbox.
I like it.
And we might just be on the cusp of a new era in neurological treatment.
Because right now, it feels like with so many neurological conditions, we're just managing symptoms.
Right.
We're not really fixing the problem. But imagine if this C7 approach, this rewiring, what if it could be applied to spinal cord injuries or even like neurodegenerative diseases?
Yeah. There are actually researchers exploring those very possibilities. Of course, these are incredibly complex conditions.
For sure.
But The success we're seeing with C7 nerve transfer in stroke recovery, it offers a glimmer of hope, and it's definitely a new avenue to explore.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. We went from stroke rehab to potentially revolutionizing how we treat the entire nervous system.
It's exciting, isn't it?
I need a minute to process this.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But that's what I love about this kind of research. It forces us to think differently, to challenge what we think is possible.
And that's what this deep dive is all about, getting everyone listening to think, and maybe even do a little research of their own afterwards. But we've still got more to uncover about C7 itself.
You know, it just dawned on me. We're talking about actually rewiring the nervous system here? I mean, that sounds like something out of science fiction, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it?
But what's amazing is the actual procedure is pretty elegant when you think about it. It's not like we're implanting some high-tech device or doing some kind of crazy gene editing. We're literally just taking a nerve from one part of the body and using it to reroute signals in another.
It really speaks to the power of just observation and medical research.
Yeah.
Finding these really elegant solutions from within the body itself.
And it also highlights how important collaboration is. I mean, think about it. This entire breakthrough came from borrowing a technique used for brachial plexus injuries.
Right. Who would have thought?
Totally different part of the body, totally different condition. But
It's like those life hack videos, but for, neuroscience.
There you go.
You're using a paperclip to fix something you never thought it could fix. Except in this case, the paperclip is a nerve and the fix could change someone's life.
I like that analogy.
It makes you wonder, though, if we can do this, if we could borrow techniques across different areas of medicine like this, what other hidden connections are out there?
It's an exciting thought, isn't it?
It really is.
Because it makes you think, well, imagine a future where we're not just managing the symptoms of these neurological conditions, but we're actually able to rewire the nervous system to truly overcome them. We're not there yet, but C7 nerve transfer is a perfect example of how this kind of approach could be the key.
Yeah, it's like we've been handed this incredible map, but we've only just started to explore the territory. Who knows what other breakthroughs are out there?
Absolutely.
So to wrap things up for our listeners today, we've covered a lot, from the basics of C7 nerve transfer to that really exciting Zeng study, too. The potential implications this could have for treating other neurological conditions. But I think the biggest takeaway here is this. The future of stroke recovery is looking pretty bright.
Brighter than ever, I'd say.
We're moving beyond just managing symptoms. We're entering a new era where we can actually restore function, even years after a stroke. And that's something worth getting excited about.
Absolutely.
So if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, and I have no doubt that it has, I encourage you to keep digging. Check out the latest research on C7 nerve transfer. Learn more about the incredible world of neuroregeneration. Let your imagination run wild with possibilities here, because who knows? Maybe one of you listening right now will be the one to discover the next borrow technique, the one that changes everything for stroke recovery. Or, heck, even something even bigger than that.
No, wouldn't that be something?
So until next time, everyone, keep those brains engaged and stay curious. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.